Magandang araw, Podmates. Howie Severino muli na may kausap na namang natatanging Pilipino, si Dr. Gideon Lasco, who wears many hats and is a doctor in more ways than one. He is a medical doctor but also a doctor of philosophy. He has a PhD in medical anthropology. He's a researcher, columnist, book author, mountain climber, advocate for drug policy reform, outspoken Twitter user, an innovative thinker about a lot of things. He's won a National Book Award for his book of essays, The Philippines is Not a Small Country, and he even coined a term, medical populism, early on in the pandemic that was adopted by other researchers and academics, and even used by Time magazine, among others. We'll have him explain what that term means later. Magandang araw sa'yo, Gideon Lasco.
Magandang araw, Howie.
Yeah. So Gideon, nasa Amerika ka ngayon, no? So opposite yung ating time zone, just to inform our listeners. Before I ask you about your various interests, I want you first to share some life hacks with our listeners, myself included. Kasi, like you, I have a lot of interests, but I can't seem to find enough time to pursue most of them with any depth. But you have managed to organize your time to do deep dives about many things, no? And on an assortment of platforms. So Gideon, anong system mo for time management?
Well, that's really a hard question because ako mismo nag-struggle sa time management. I wish I can do more. And actually, I feel na lately, especially pa nag-travel, maraming oras na nawawala adjusting sa mga time differences and all that. But what I have found really effective in terms of squeezing in time is yung outdoors and yung exercise. So halimbawa, pag ako nag-swim, and that's one of my regular activities. So I try every day to have one cardio. It can be running, it can be biking, it can be swimming. But it's a priority for me to do a cardio 1 hour. So people will say 1 hour is too much for them. Pero para sa akin, pag nasa swimming pool ako, halimbawa, yung isang oras na yon, yun na yung aking oras para mag-isip. Because when you're in the swimming pool, there are no distractions. You cannot check your Twitter feed or be distracted by social media. So it's actually quality time to plan your day and to think about ideas. And similarly, yung pag-akit ko ng bundok, ito rin yung aking oras para mag-isip ng mga ideas ko, para plano. So this quiet time, I think we in our fast-paced world, we are losing these kinds of moments na nakakapag-isip, and that's why we lose time. So I think prioritizing these things, these activities, has helped me a lot on that front.
Yeah, well, that's a good reminder, no? Kasi a lot of people would think, wow, an hour swimming or doing exercise, parang kakain lang yan ng oras ko, no? For achieving more. Pero ang sinasabi mo, it's actually essential for achievement, no? For achievement in other aspects of your life. Kasi sabi mo nga, while you're swimming, nakakapag-isip ka. So, once you're out of the pool, medyo may nabuo ka ng mga ideas and thoughts, no? So, you spend less time just sitting around trying to think things through. Ginawa mo na yun sa pool while, putting in your time getting yourself physically fit. So, it's also a way of doing multitasking. And it's
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that our problem in our time is not that we don't have enough time, but we have too many distractions. And I think having these regular activities that are part of our routine, including physical exercise, but yung iba, for them, it might be different. It can be yoga, it can be meditation, but having these moments of regularity and also mindfulness, letting go of all of these distractions, I think is really good for all of us.
I'm intrigued lang by your career choices, no? Kasi you're a medical doctor.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you still practice medicine. I can't imagine you having the time, no? Do you still practice medicine, or have you kind of set it aside to do the other things that you're doing?
I practiced briefly. I got my license and graduated 2010. So after that, for the next 2 years, I was practicing as a resident physician in my hometown of San Pablo in Laguna. But for the past 10 years, I haven't really practiced in a formal way. But at the same time, dala-dala mo yung pagiging doktor eh. So, hindi mo siya pwedeng bitawan.
Mhm.
Kasi may mga panahon na parang it's your responsibility to be a doctor whether you're practicing or not. So I have maintained my license, I have maintained my competency to to be a doctor to my family, to
Mhm.
my friends, to emergency situations. So sometimes pag wala talagang tumataas ng kamay sa eroplano, I always keep waiting for people to volunteer dahil hindi naman talaga ako nag-practice on an everyday basis. Pero kung
Mhm.
wala na talaga, it's still part of my Hippocratic oath to
Mhm.
help people.
Okay, nangyari na ba yon na nagtaas ka ng kamay sa eroplano kasi walang ibang nagtaas ng kamay and you
Yes,
actually
oo, yes.
assisted?
I was so worried about it kasi may nag-collapse. It was a flight to Butuan, I think, but back in those pre-pandemic days.
Mhm.
And thankfully, it was just a case of hypoglycemia. So I was able to manage the patient, and then everyone was watching. So may added pressure and yung mga pasahero. So especially during the pandemic, I had volunteered sa PGH as well kasi at the time hindi natin alam kung ano mangyayari. Baka talagang
Mhm.
magkaubusan. So I had to put my name out there in case talagang kailanganin. And of course, helping relatives navigate the pandemic, helping family, helping neighbors, etc.
Mhm.
Part yun ng pagiging doktor. Although I'm no longer practicing professionally or
Mhm.
for a living.
Mhm. So you practiced for a couple of years tapos nag career shift ka. You went to the UP College of Medicine, considered, the top medical school in the Philippines. No, so what did your parents think about that decision? Because that's usually the dream of many parents. No.
Well, I have to thank them for being supportive and for not even questioning it at all. Because ako yung unang doktor sa pamilya namin. Maybe their expectation of a doctor was someone who goes to a hospital and practices, and even my grandparents. So I felt that at the back of their minds, they might have expected that. But they,
Mhm.
they never really said it. I think nakatulong na yung father ko was a professor in UP Los Baños and has
Okay.
been an academic. And I think he understands that in a way, he inspired us to follow in his footsteps
Mhm.
in having an academic life. So
Mhm.
they were very supportive
Mhm.
of my decision to be more into research. And as I keep telling them, hindi nasayang yung aking medical degree because without it, I couldn't be a medical anthropologist. I think yung perspective of being a doctor allows me to really look at health from multiple perspectives. And I think that's been very helpful and allows me
Mhm.
to communicate to doctors,
Mhm.
to engage in health research effectively. So I wouldn't say na it's really a 180-degree turn, but it's more of a continuation of my career.
Pag sinabing medical doctor, everyone knows what that is. Pero medical anthropologist, ano bang ginagawa niyan?
What we do is a matter of recognizing the linkages between culture and medicine. Ano nga ba ang nagiging impluwensya sa ating kalusugan ng ating mga pananaw, ng ating mga practices bilang mga Pilipino. So for example, during the pandemic, we saw how people went ahead and did their own thing, independent of what the experts say, independent of what the UH says. Ang mga tao uminom ng salaba. Halimbawa, ang mga tao nagkaubos na ng vitamin C sa mga butika. So people have their own practices. People have their own health knowledge. And we medical anthropologists think that it's important to understand that knowledge, to document that kinds of knowledge and practices. To see Governor Gwen Garcia of Cebu was controversial dahil nirecommend niya yung suob or tuob, which is like steam inhalation. But many Filipinos actually did that, and because it's part of our cultural repertoire, or ito yung mga talagang mga go-to practices natin when it comes to illness prevention. And we think that it's important to document that. So isa lang yun sa mga mga paksa na inaaral namin sa medical anthropology, mga pananaw sa bakuna, mga pananaw sa gamot, maraming mga pananaw ang tao tungkol sa antibiotics, people take it on their own. Meron pa mga tinatawag na mag-asawang gamot, like yung paracetamol and amoxicillin. So wala yan sa textbook, wala yan sa kaalaman ng mga doktor, pero bahagi yan ng kaalaman ng mga tao sa pang-araw-araw na kalusugan.
That specialization, yung medical anthropology, has become, I mean, extremely relevant in the last several years kasi it gave you an informed perspective on drug policy. Of course, yung number one priority ng Duterte administration was yung drug war niya, no? And alam ko nag-umpisa ka mag-research tungkol sa drug policy like more than a decade ago, no? And then of course the pandemic created all of these issues na nabanggit mo, from itong mga traditional healing practices to beliefs about vaccination, and then yung behavior ng mga tao, reaction ng mga tao. And then also you were also commenting a lot on yung behavior or yung reaction ng mga local political actors, but at the same time you had this nag-zoom out ka rin, ano, to see global trends and perspective. When I searched medical populism, medical populist, yung pangalan mo lang yung lumalabas. So tama ba ako? Ikaw nakaisip ng medical populism?
And we developed it before the pandemic pa. I was collaborating with, actually I was just having conversations with the sociologist Nicole Curato.
Sa Australia,
who has been doing work at the time around populism.
Mm-mm.
And I said, wow, this is so applicable to medicine, to medical issues. And so we collaborated to write this paper to introduce the concept of medical populism back in 2019.
Okay.
And Nicole has since moved on to other topics. And when the pandemic happened, I saw that, wow, ito yung nasulat namin nangyayari. Kasi what we said was that during times of health crisis, meron tendency na i-simplify ng mga pandemic, yung i-simplify ng mga politician yung nangyayari. So that's the first component. And then number two is to dramatize, to make a drama out of it. Or spectacular, tinatawag namin spectacularize. Parang i-exaggerate yung kanilang ginagawa tungkol sa whatever crisis it is. And then to make divisions, to be very divisive about it. Kasihin nyo, ay, kaya nagkakaroon ng ganitong crisis dahil sa kanila, either big pharma, or mga foreigners, or mga pasaway. There's always this divisive character. And when I saw that happen in the COVID-19, I wrote about it, and then yun yung na-recognized ng mga scholars elsewhere as a framework to look at the pandemic.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I guess part of this framework is yung punitive responses, no, na nakita natin dito sa ating bansa, no, as opposed to just other ways of addressing the problem, no. So
yes.
Meron kayong ibang epidemic or pandemic na case studies, no, to show this kind
absolutely.
of leadership. Mm-mm.
Yes, the drug wars. Kasama na sa mga halimbawa natin yung drug war kasi it's a simplification. And the good thing about the comparative perspective is it parang allows us to depoliticize the paper. So we're not just saying that this is about the Philippines or about a certain politician, about Duterte, but this is a phenomenon that we observe elsewhere. For example, for the drug wars, may maraming mga politicians sa Southeast Asia, including Thaksin Shinawatra, Rodrigo Duterte, and also Joko Widodo of Indonesia. They were saying na they were making claims about drugs, na drugs destroy the brain. If you take this kind of drug like methamphetamine, it's beyond rehabilitation. Mm-hmm. So all of these claims are simplification of drug use. It's a simplification of drug use. And yung kanilang responses were very dramatic. Killing people is dramatic. These bloody drug wars, whether in the Philippines or in Thailand in 2002, are very dramatic. very visible. Kitang-kita ng mga tao may ginagawa. So politically, it might benefit them. But what happens from a public health perspective is that nawawala yung public health approach, socioeconomic approach in favor of punitive responses. And then another example we used was the dengue vaccine scandal. So we were very clear in our paper na we're not making any judgment whether tama o mali yung ginagawa ng mga politicians. But during the dengue vaccine scandal, we saw very dramatic, di ba? Yung dengue vaccine causes death, yun yung simplification. And then we saw the drama of the pictures of children being paraded in the Supreme Court, claims na parang namatay daw dahil sa dengue vaccine. All of this is very dramatic. It's a spectacle. Persida Acosta participated in a spectacle. She was wearing white cloth and then even collapsed during a press conference. So that was an example of dramatization. And then we also gave the example of HIV denialism in South Africa. So we gave a number of examples during the first paper before COVID.
I listened to your conversation on the podcast Psychoactive, no, which took place just months ago. Psychoactive is conversations about drug policy, all kinds of related topics related to drugs, no. Pero there was one provocative question that the American interviewer, no, si Ethan, apparently he was well informed about drug policies around the world, no. Pero yung isang sinabi niya doon, may mga ibang bansa na nagkaroon ng hardline drug policies, like US, Mexico, Thailand. Pero sabi niya, what made the Philippines distinct was the messaging from the top, no, yung rhetoric that we were hearing from President Duterte at the time, no, for actually the whole 6 years, no, yung very may pagka to put it mildly, it was a very brutally frank kind of rhetoric about what was on his mind, no, about drugs. But ang tanong niya to you as an anthropologist was yung uniqueness ni Duterte, what does it reflect about our culture that even after all of that rhetoric, comparing himself to Hitler, for example, encouraging killing, saying that he's going to defend cops who have killed, etc., etc. Aside from the rape jokes and all of the other crudeness that we heard for 6 years, no, sabi niya after at the end of his term as president, napaka-popular pa rin ni President Duterte, no? So ang tanong niya, what is it about Philippine culture that makes it seem like Filipinos are so bloodthirsty? I mean, he's an outsider. I guess it's a logical question to ask, no? But this is back in May, hindi pa siya bumababa at that time. I'm wondering if you've given that question more thought after several more months. And I'm sure people are going to be asking this again and again, no? As history unfolds, no? Ganun ba ka-unique? Number one, si President Duterte in terms of what he the kind of language that he used, the messaging, and then of course the kind of responses that people had, no? And what does it say about our culture na naging popular yung ganun behavior, yung ganung klaseng leadership?
Well, thank you for asking that and bringing that up, Howie. Kasi I think that beyond the term of Duterte, drug issues will continue to dominate our public discourse. Actually, nakikita natin yan ngayon. There's this the son of Remulla, and then people are debating about marijuana should be legalized. So the drugs will always be an issue. But what I think what I said in that podcast and what I will repeat now is that while Duterte took it into an extreme, yung mga pananaw niya and even his rhetoric has been around for 50 years. And Filipinos have looked at drugs as a moral evil for decades. That's why nag-resonate yung message ni Duterte. The drug war in the Philippines did not start in 2016, but it's part of a long genealogy. If you read, and as scholars, as we read in the 1970s, if you read the message of even the bishop, in napaka-strong ng kanilang rhetoric against drugs. It's almost as if si Duterte yung nagsasalita.
Bishops
Yes,
pa yun, ah.
yes. I would say na the reason why people supported that is because matagal nang, for many Filipinos, drugs are the cause of crime, drugs are the cause of rape, and so many other issues, which is why they feel it's justified for this kind of exceptional measure. And that's
So,
perpetuated sa mga radio shows.
mm, mm.
Tuwing may nababalita, and Mike Tan documented this as early as the early 1990s. Tuwing merong, grabe, may na-rape, ganyan, napaka-karumal-dumal na krimen. Malamang, tiyak na tanging mga addict lang ang makakagawa niyan. So people always resort to blaming people who use drugs for all kinds of crimes, and that's led to this kind of attitude.
Mm-hmm. So ang sinasabi mo, this attitude, this mind conditioning about drugs, long preceded social media. Di ba? Kasi
Yes,
social media,
yes.
very visible, very evident yung palakpakan ng mga tao pag may napapatay na suspects, etc. This whole
Yes.
doing away with due process, parang okay lang sa mga tao. You're saying that this has a long history and parang nag-culminate lang in the thousands of people killed.
Yes, absolutely.
the last
I unequivocally I reject the suggestion that Filipinos are bloodthirsty. No ethnic group, no country can be labeled as such. But we need to look at the historical development that led to a certain group of people viewing a certain topic a certain way. Do you remember back in 2001, nag-war on drugs din si Gloria?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember in Inquirer, they put up this parang talk of the town. I'm not sure if you remember that. I think it was
Yes.
Manolo Quezon who used to curate that. So there was a
Okay.
talk of the town soliciting comments from readers about what they think should be done for drugs. And the comments were revelatory. We're talking about 2001 and not 2016. Ang mga respondents, and I quote them, restore death by firing squad, kill the dealers and the pushers. Vigilantes are the answer. And then, parang telegraph into the future, parang 2016. Pero back in 2001, someone wrote, experience shows that the most of the suspects are released from detention only to continue their illegal activities. That's why I support Davao City Mayor Rodrigo Duterte's tough stance against drugs, which some rights groups denounce as inhuman despite its effectiveness. So that was back in 2001. Filipinos were already admiring Duterte for his approach to drugs, which is why matagal na to. And Duterte in 2016 tapped into this kind of attitude, but of course he also reinforced it. So he both reflected those attitudes, but he also reinforced them by doing his own violent rhetoric about people who use drugs.
But ikaw, you have a different perspective based on your research and your interviews with a lot of drug users, no? Matagal ka na nagre-research nito. I think you even did your masteral thesis on drug use, no? On why people use drugs, di ba? Ang isang narinig kong sinabi mo minsan was for a lot of people, methamphetamine has a social or useful function, no, beyond recreation. When I say methamphetamine, of course, a lot of listeners will know that's shabu, no?
Mm-hmm.
And many people use illegal drugs and don't actually commit crimes kasi may malaking assumption nga na sabi mo nga sa sobrang na demonize na yung drugs, so many crimes are being attributed to drug use, no? May nang rape, ibig sabihin addict, di ba? So parang may association na ganun, and that has created nga this attitude towards drug users na they're less than human, and their lives can be taken away, their lives are not very valuable, etc. No, have a different attitude or perspective on it that's based on real, long-term research, no, that you started, more than a decade ago, and you're still continuing with it. So, ano yung alternative perspective dito sa drug use? And the next question would be based on that. How should the new government be thinking about drugs?
Well, thank you again for really zooming into this, because I think it's so valuable for us to recognize that people have been using drugs for a long time. And way back, since time immemorial, people use psychoactive substances for a number of reasons. Alcohol, caffeine is a drug even. So in many ways, kasi yung pagiging illegal ng isang drug, this is really arbitrary. It's a matter of political and legal convention to say whether a drug is illegal or not. So for example, cannabis. I was just in Thailand last month, and I saw how cannabis is openly sold in many places because they have legalized medical cannabis. And of course, it was a controversial step in Thailand. But even Rizal, as Ambeto Campo writes, diba? Even Rizal tried cannabis when he was a young. He wrote it in his diary, even. So people have been using drugs for a long time. And in my own research, I saw how yung mga kabataan, ang paggamit nila ng shabu ay tinatawag nila pampagilas. It's like their vitamins. It gives them energy. Napakahirap ng trabaho nila. At marami silang ginagawang mga hanap buhay, pag-porter, pag-vendor, pag-tricycle driver.
Well, you cited a butcher, no, who had to be working madaling araw and had to be wide awake, otherwise baka mahiwa yung kanyang daliri or something, no? So kailangan gising na gising siya sa madaling araw, no?
Yes. So if you look at our economic context sa Pilipinas, na napakahirap ng maraming mga hanap buhay natin at kinakailangan gising sa gabi. I interviewed this truck driver na sabi niya mas okay nang isugal yung buhay niya sa shabu instead na isugal sa kalsada na baka makatulog siya at baka makabangga. Because the effect of shabu physiologically is that it's really a stimulant, so it makes you awake. It's also an appetite suppressant, so hindi ka magugutom. It's very important for people who have little resources or time to eat. And it's really a stimulant, so it's like an energy booster. It's like an energy drink. So it gives people that energy, tamang gilas, so confidence, mga isip ko para magbenta ng mga mga chichirya, tsaka mga inumin. So it helps people in different contexts. Of course, there's also they acknowledge the possibility of addiction. They acknowledge the harms that may come. But given the difficult economic context, they see it as a response na parang in a way kapit sa patalim. But in a way, many of them don't run into problems. In the same way na alcohol is also associated with many bad things, di ba? But we don't automatically associate na pag uminom ka ng alak, mamamatay tao ka or mamumog ka ng asawa, di ba? Why do we glorify and even sanction the use of alcohol, but we really think that the possession of one stick of cannabis or a very tiny amount of shabu, it deserves several years in jail. Napaka-harsh ng ating mga batas sa drugs. At maraming mga kabataan, kagaya ng mga na-interview ko, na mahuli mo lang or mataniman lang ng napakaliit na amount, kulong na sila. And anong mas harmful sa lipunan? Yung pagiging paggamit nila na wala namang ibang nakaharm, or yung makukulong sila at paano na yung pamilya nila, paano na yung kinabukasan nila, etc. etc. So our drug policies are actually doing more harm than the drugs themselves, I would argue. Which is why, to answer your second question, anong gagawin, is number one, it's very important, hopefully, to really pursue criminal justice reform. Hindi natin kailangang parusahan yung mga tao na ayaw lang makatulog or naghahanap lang ng tamang gilas. They don't deserve to be punished with this extremely harsh jail sentences. And alam natin kung gaano kamiserable yung kondisyon sa ating mga bilangguan, let alone getting killed. So that's number one. We have to move away from this punitive drug regime that's prone to corruption. It's prone to abuse. There's no check and balance. People are just by the accusation of being a drug user, being an addict, ano nangyayari sa mga tao, di ba? So it's abuse prone and it's harsh. It's disproportionate to whatever penalty there should be. So we have to move away from that to pursue a supportive regime, something that supports people instead of punishing them. Kung meron talagang addiction and we don't rule that out na pwede talagang magkaroon ng mga negative effects, then let's give them help. Let's give them help as a public health response, but not this kind of punitive response.
To what extent is it true na yung iniisip ng maraming tao na there are a lot of crimes being committed by drug users and drug addicts? Is there any evidence behind that?
Ano kasi siya eh, it's an association that people make and people, halimbawa, merong isang ng rape, people will test for many things, baka nakainom din ng alcohol or so many other factors. But what will make it to the news is that nag-test positive for any kind of drug or so hindi natin alam. I think it's more of a convenient recourse, a convenient narrative for people. And at the same time, it might also be a feel-good narrative na parang mas madaling sisihin yung drugs sa kasamaan ng tao instead of acknowledging that people are capable of evil even without those kinds of drugs. It's not about the drugs, about the person. So I think we need to move away from that kind of narrative while acknowledging na, of course, the substance use and including alcohol use and other kinds of substances can lead to abuse. So I don't deny that. And I think that has to be dealt with as well. But we cannot associate all kinds of drug use. In fact, according to UNODC itself, UN Office of Drugs and Crime, a very small, only 1% of all drug use is problematic. So a vast majority of drug use is non-problematic.
I need your anthropologist perspective on a larger question. So there's been some discussion of Duterte's impact on our politics, but how about our culture? This rhetoric. I mean, there's maraming assumptions dyan eh. Kaya maraming kabataan ngayon na nagmumura, ganun. I mean, may ganung assumptions na dahil yan kay Duterte, etc. No? Yung pagka-crude niya, ina-adapt ngayon ng iba, and then some politicians, see that style as an effective, electoral strategy, etc. How much of that behavior are going to be ingrained in our culture?
Well, I don't really know, to be honest. I don't know enough. It's only a few months after Duterte. And of course, we have a tendency of ascribing significance to events that just happened. So it will take time for us to really measure the effects of Duterte in terms of those things, yung pagmumura. But definitely, he has legitimized, by enabling this culture of violence that we've seen since 2016. I think that the more immediate and pressing question is whether he has had, and to what extent has he had this detrimental impact on even our criminal justice system. The idea of people getting killed, we're still grappling with the death of Percy, di ba? Of this radio broadcaster.
Radio broadcaster, Percy Lapid.
So it's important to really look at rule of law, look at our institutions, look at our police in terms of what Duterte has done. And that will require a multidisciplinary effort. Anthropology is just one, but it will require all of us to come together and to try to understand the impact.
Well, speaking of which, you've been tweeting about the recent appointment of a former PNP chief, no, former chief of the National Police, si General Camilo Cascolan as an Undersecretary of Health, no, sa DOH. Parang it caught a lot of people by surprise. Medyo head scratching yung appointment na yan, ano. Marami naman tayong magagaling na doktor ang in-appoint as a second in command, basically sa DOH is a policeman, police officer. What do you think what the thinking was behind that?
Well, yun nga eh. Diba? There's so many people to elevate into that position. And I don't just refer to doctors, but we have nurses who know so much about public health. We have midwives, we have community health practitioners. We have people within the DOH hierarchy who need to be, I mean, they would benefit and the country will benefit from their elevation into a higher office where they can be in a better position to address the complexity of public health. Road safety is part of public health. I know that DOH is beginning to recognize the value of something we both of us care deeply about, Howie, di ba? Yung cycling and making the country a bikeable, safe for biking and walking. So merong entire bureau yung DOH that's supposed to be doing this. And of course, there's non-communicable diseases. Kalaban din natin ngayon yung mga hypertension, diabetes, especially the pandemic has maraming mga naging at risk sa COVID is because of they had diabetes, they had hypertension. And of course, dahil sa mga lockdowns, marami ring lumala yung kanilang mga non-communicable diseases. We have mental health. Alam natin, lalo na sa mga kabataan, na napakalaking issue nito, napakalaking concern nito sa ating bansa. So with so many health problems, we're not just even thinking about COVID. In fact, I'm really trying to push people to think beyond COVID. But so in light of all of these concerns that require expertise and experience, for the government to appoint this general who, as far as I know, has no experience in health, is really an insult to the country, and it's an insult to DOH itself. I can see no justification other than political patronage, and that's very unfortunate.
Political patronage. So, in other words, this is a retired police chief. He needs to be put somewhere. So, nilagay siya sa DOH. But wala kayang messaging involved there? Is it a statement of how they're planning to handle, health crisis, public health?
Well, if they are thinking of doubling down on a punitive response, then they're doubling down on a calamity, on something that's been really bad for the country. We know, especially after 2 years of the pandemic, more than 2 years of the pandemic, we know that many of the things were really medical populism. Many of the things were really useless and inconvenient for people. And there's no reflexivity in government. There's no acknowledgement of the mistakes that's done, including the punitive response, all those checkpoints. Isipin mo, Howie, all the effort of all these barangay officials, just staffing these checkpoints, implementing all of these rules, quarantine pass, etc. And even these face shields. And di ba, for the longest time, we had to do all of these contact tracing forms. And mukhang the only legacy is that we're all being spammed. Our phones, our mobile numbers are being spammed. So this kind of surveillance style response, punitive response, did not work. It was inconvenient. It was useless, and it was harmful to people. So I'd be worried if that's the intention, is to double down on this kind of response. Because obviously that did not work, and it will not work in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to go on to a couple of other topics, if you don't mind, Gideon. No, I know it's getting late there. I want to explore your other interests, and I know you're to many Filipinos. I know you're probably best known as a columnist with the Inquirer. No, but to be honest, I appreciate your longer essays in Sapiens More, no, the online anthropological magazine, because that's you do longer pieces there, no, that's where you do much of your deeper dives, at least for public consumption, no? And I particularly enjoyed your essays on the plantita craze, yung dogs and askals, the pure breed versus the half breed, etc. And you use that as a kind of a prism for understanding social relations, no, between mga mestiza versus the Indio, etc. No, and the pleasures of coffee, you give these popular topics a more scientific perspective, and that's why I like them, no. But how do you choose your topics? Kasi you write these for an anthropology magazine, no. So all of these are within your purview, no. I mean, ang lawak pala ng ang lawak pala ng scope ng anthropology.
Tama ka, no? Napakalawak ng anthropology. So you have to focus, you have to have a thematic approach. So what I have found interesting to really look at over the past 3 years is our relationship as humans with other species. So anthropology
plants,
kasi
hindi lang animals.
Yes.
Oo.
Kasi anthropology from the root word is parang study of humans, di ba? Anthro meaning man, human, and then logos, the study of. So literally, it's a study of humans, but the discipline has since evolved into recognizing how we live in a more than human world, and we have to. The human experience is actually a more than human experience. So I'm fascinated with the role of different species in our everyday life. So, kasama na dyan yung mga ating pets, dogs. I'm thinking of writing about cats as well in the future. Kasi I was traveling in Turkey recently, and I noticed that parang sobrang close ng
mga ruins. I noticed
pusa.
that. I've been to Turkey. Maraming stray cats sa ruins doon.
Yeah, they love their cats. I was working remotely in one of those cafes in Eastern Turkey. Mm-hmm. And then meron dalawang pusang lumapit sa akin, and then talagang they wanted to be really treated well, and nakakatawa.
Sanay sa tao.
So I want to write about cats in Turkey. I want to write about spiders in the Philippines, yung ating larong gagamba. I think is one topic that's on my mind, because I think it's fascinating that even insects are objects of play for Filipinos in a very unique way, and part of our culture as well. Buti na lang merong nagsulat ng ethnography about that in the early 2000s. So napakahalaga ng ethnography kasi hindi lang siya making sense of the world, but it's also documenting what's going on. So kung wala nagsulat about face shields ngayon, di ba? Hindi natin yan maaalala in the future. So in a way, ethnography is also writing history of the present, in a sense. So yun yung naging thematic focus ko lately, Howie, is yung mga ating relationship with other species.
And other beings. Kasi nagsulat ka rin tungkol sa, I think, possible existence of extraterrestrials in Venus.
Yeah. Thank you for reading those articles. I really had fun writing those. And I think that's also important in coming up with topics, coming up with research projects, is that you have to think of something you'll enjoy doing.
Well, your writing is informed by to a great extent by your travels. Not only do you travel widely, but you go to places outside of the usual Pinoy axis of America, Europe, East Asia. No, you've spent a lot of time in Africa and Latin America. Much of this, I think, is for your mountain climbing, no, but also research and observation that's enabled you to write about even quirky topics, no, from firsthand experience. Like when you were in Mexico, you were able to learn about the Filipino origins of tequila, no, as a way of looking at the Filipino connections to Mexico. Na parang hindi masyadong alam ng both Mexicans and Filipinos, no, na
right.
Galing pala sa atin yung methods nila, no, and that's their national drink. Sabi mo nga may tawag mo doon gastro-nationalism. Ayaw lang aminin na galing sa atin. Parang they would rather credit the Aztecs for that, no? And you went to Ethiopia also, the birthplace of coffee, and wrote about global coffee culture. So is this a deliberate career strategy on your part then, to go where few Filipinos go, so you can write about things that few of us have written about?
Well, it's a personal fascination on one level, that I want to climb mountains that have not been visited by Filipinos, or less frequented by Filipinos. I think it's also a matter of representing our country in these places, and also cultural exchange, learning about different places contributes to my growth as an anthropologist, but it also contributes to my consciousness as a columnist because there are world events happening, and having been to these places gives a kind of immediacy and a more kind of depth in learning about current events. I was just in Georgia at the border of Russia and Georgia 2 months ago. And feel na feel sa Georgia, talagang for them, it's really personal. Feel nila yung Ukraine war. And you talk to these people, you talk about, listen to their perspective, and you end up learning a lot. And I also think that as a, di ba, ang tawag nila sa Pilipinas, part of Global South. Parang nung una, third world, and then naging ngayon, Global South. They have all these terminologies to refer to developing countries or marginalized countries. I think that politically, I also really want to travel to the colonized countries of the world, the post-colonial countries of the world, because they're just more interesting. Doon din naman galing yung mga products. If you go to Switzerland and you celebrate their Swiss chocolate, saan ba nanggaling yung kanilang chocolate? It came from Latin America and Africa. Saan ba nanggaling yung tea in the UK? It came from Asia. So I think it's more fascinating for me to look at all of these countries outside the usual. Bukas I will go to Colombia. I will be in Bogota. Andun pa yung bike ko na iniwan ko nung March.
But
so I look forward to
you wrote
biking.
about Colombia then, no? Yung use nila ng the way they use Spanish, no?
Mm-hmm.
Spanish words.
And I also wrote about their biking scene. It's really incredible. Kasi every Sunday, millions of people bike in Bogota alone.
Wow. So ibang-iba yun sa image ng Colombia, you know. It's usually associated with drug cartels, di ba? Yung Medellin.
Yeah.
So you're giving you're letting us know about another side of a country. So that's good. Balikan ko lang yung coffee, you know, as both of us are coffee lovers. You wrote that you've been able to find Ethiopian coffee, you know, sold in the Philippines. Nagkaroon ka ng taste for Ethiopian coffee, which is the birthplace of coffee in Ethiopia itself, no? And then you wrote quite extensively about the regional differences and etc. No, but I've always wondered, because we grow great coffee in the Philippines, bakit nasa abroad ako, kahit yung mga coffee shop sa ibang bansa na iba-ibang sources ng coffee ang tinitinda nila, no? Wala nagsaserve o wala nagtitinda ng Philippine coffee, no? Have you encountered Philippine coffee overseas sa mga ganyang, you know, mga coffee shops? Or is this a problem of marketing, or people haven't discovered Philippine coffee yet?
Actually, I was just in Davao also a few weeks ago. And yung mga friends ko doon, they made me try all of these local coffee na from Mount
Daming
Apo.
coffee sa Mindanao, oo.
Sergio Loon, and it's by name. It's by grower, the name of the grower. Sergio Loon, Lendy Loon, Cherry Cabanday. So they're singing praises of all of these. And I like Sergio. It's my favorite coffee, by the way. And I should bring you, order ako, and we should try it together. Yung Sergio Loon coffee from Mount Apo. It's one of my favorites. So I think Philippine coffee is about to have its moment in the global coffee scene, because there's always an appetite for new flavors, and I think very complex and very interesting yung mga notes ng coffee in Mount Apo, and I am sure the same can be said of our coffee in different parts, Bukidnon, and also of course Sagada and Benguet. I think Philippine coffee is about to have its moment, and there's greater interest in that. Sa ngayon, mostly domestic, but I think it will be also international.
Most academics like yourself, no, they tend to super specialize, so they can do deep dives, you know, focus, concentrate on their specialization, no, so they're able to produce new bodies of knowledge, no. But ikaw, ang dami mong sinusulat sa you know, on so many different subjects and so many different ways. I mean, you do long form, obviously. You've written books. At the same time, ang hilig mo mag-tweet, which puts a premium on brevity, Do you ever think you're spreading yourself too thinly?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes, I think that you have to control yourself, especially with our society na andaling mag-weigh in sa mga lahat ng bagay. Sometimes I remind myself na you don't need to comment on everything. You don't know everything even, and you cannot really overextend. It takes some humility to practice that, and also discipline, because you cannot do everything, and you cannot write about everything. So I have tried to focus on particularly the things that are close to my heart: health, of course, and environment. These are the two issues that I care deeply. So just last week, I was in Mindanao climbing this mountain in Davao de Oro called Mount Pandadagsaan. And for 3 days, we were in the mountain and walang internet. So it's a great time also to let go of these impulse to weigh in social media and realize that there's so much more out there that's going on, that's happening offline.
Mhm. Well, you've managed this switching back and forth between itong ang academic research, no, and the kind of writing you do for academe, and then yung pagti-tweet, no, na we all know that because tweets are so short and they're done so rapidly. How do you manage that between that academic kind of work and itong yung pagkokomentaryo sa social media?
Well, of course, particularly when it comes to research, talagang kailangan ng nuance, and it's so important. Sometimes it's really hard to tweet about things that require a lot of complexity, things that require a lot of context. But there are also times, Howie, na feeling ko, klaro naman eh. It's a moment of moral clarity, and you just have to say what you feel, if only to encourage other people. So some people think wala ka naman makakonvince sa Twitter eh.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's true. Maybe it's a chaotic attempt to try to win over people. But encouraging those who already believe what you believe in, and maybe helping people decide on a certain issue. There are moments of moral clarity that it's a matter of making it known where you stand. And I think that it's okay for an academic to weigh in those issues. And at the same time, I'm also able to link my columns in my Twitter account, and also my long form articles.
Mm-hmm.
And if not for the short tweets, baka hindi nila masyadong papansinin yung mga links to longer accounts. So I think they complement each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that people who are interested to know more about what I think can always look at my book, can always look at my columns. So they're not necessarily contradictory. And I think there's a way, there's a style to tweet in a way that you're not very specific, but you can ask questions. You can phrase your tweets into questions to get people to talk. You can be you can phrase your tweets in a way that you don't really impose some kind of idea, but just to provoke discussion and make people question what's going on in our country, in our society.
I just want to wrap up by asking you about dogs, no? You also wrote about dogs, and daming dog lovers. Marami siguro nakikinig sa atin ngayon, mga dog lovers din, ano? For the longest time, yun nga, sinulat mo, ang baba ng tingin sa mga tinatawag na askals, no? Versus yung mga pure breeds. Iba yung pagtrato sa mga mixed breed na aso versus pure breeds. And in fact, you compare that to how people view each other, di ba? Based on skin color, based on race, based on ethnicity, may ganong klaseng hierarchy, etc. No? But at the same time, you were noting parang small signs of change tungkol sa mga, well, sa aso, no? Sa askals in particular, and you cited yung successful national football team na tinawag na askals, partly because maraming ang mixed race na players doon, ano. And may mga celebrities din who champion askals as part of their animal welfare advocacy, no? What's prompting this change? And can you also, since you compared this to how people look at each other, no? May effect din ba to? Does it reflect people's view of each other?
And I'd like to think positively in saying that I think people are recognizing that yung mga essential race categories are not applicable. So people are beginning to recognize, for example, being Filipino as not something that is based purely on physical characteristics or based on physical characteristics. There are many ways of being Filipino, and especially now with our globalized nation, there's more openness to acknowledge na iba't iba yung itsura ng mga Pinoy. And I think that that kind of that attitude, that kind of changing attitudes about being Filipino is also translating to changing attitudes about dogs. So the very idea of indigeneity is no longer something that people are ashamed of, but something to be proud of. We see that in the Cordilleras, diba? Parang in the past, people felt that they were being discriminated for being Igorot. But now we see people from the Cordilleras really owning owning labels. I'm a proud Igorot. So people are really seeing their indigeneity as something that makes them more complex, more rich as a person. It's part of their richness as an individual. And I think that's a good thing. That's a good thing, that for us to recognize our being Filipino, our being belonging to different regions, different indigenous groups, is a source of pride. And alongside that, in parallel, we also see people seeing the beauty of our spins, our askal. So that's another good thing.
Well,
and they're really more adapted to our natural conditions in the Philippines. Kaya masarap mag-alaga ng askal. We just also so our dog, our Labrador, passed away just a few days ago. But we have already welcomed an askal named Simba to join him, and yung kanyang naiwan na si Grizzly Bear na tinatawag namin. So at least hindi naiwan na mag-isa yung kanyang long-time companion sa bahay namin. So we ourselves lang namin ng young askal named Simba in our house in Los Baños.
So okay, just as a final aside on this dog topic, no? Kasi sabi mo dun sa article mo, askal has been used as a derogatory term to refer to those kinds of dogs, no? Pero yun nga, has it already turned around in its connotation? Is it already politically correct to use askals to refer to mixed breed dogs? Kasi sabi mga aspin yung mas parang euphemism, or it's a more acceptable term. I mean, this is just a language note lang. Ano bang acceptable?
I'm not sure.
Igorot used to be derogatory, but now it's parang it's proudly used by people.
Yeah. I'm not sure, but I think that we have to allow for the possibility that it can definitely evolve in connotation. Just like so many other things in our country na parang nung una, it was an insult. But now that people know better, then it doesn't carry anymore in their derogatory connotation. So I think that's a positive development.
Okay, that's a very positive note then to end on. Gid, maraming salamat for helping us think about the burning issues of our time, and thank you for your many contributions to public conversations. Mabuhay ka. Dr. Gideon Lasco, medical anthropologist, at marami pang iba. Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Howie. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Howie Severino. Check out the Howie Severino podcast, an original for GMA News and Public Affairs. New episodes will stream every Thursday. Listen for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and other platforms.